So hello there guys, and welcome back to another brand new DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope you guys are well. Apologies for the little bit of an interlull in this season. It's just so hectic at the moment. We thought we'd take a little bit of a break, bit of a breather whilst F1 was sort of catching up with itself almost with the weekend without any racing for once in such a congested calendar. Hope you guys can appreciate that, and I hope more importantly that you are well as well. Of course, no way of going two ways about it. The weather conditions have not been fantastic unless you absolutely love hot, sweltering and humid conditions. But of course, for those of you that don't, hope you are okay. But we are back with another brand new episode. And this week, we are previewing the French Grand Prix. And joining us on this episode, as always, part of the DNF1 panel, we have Lee Wallington. Lee, first of all, how are you doing? And glad to see that you are feeling better. You're a little bit poorly recently.
Yeah, it was my turn to have a go at COVID. So yeah, I'm all good now. But apart from that, it's just sweltering away here in the UK. It's lovely, warm and hot in Western Europe at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. You came back at the right time for it, but glad to hear that you're okay and looking fresh and feeling better for this episode. And just a quick reminder to you guys that we are the independent F1 podcast that brings you race reviews and previews, a show made by the fans and for the fans, of course, as we discuss all the news, talking points and gossip in the world of Formula One for your listening and viewing pleasure. With that all out of the way, let's introduce our very special guest for this episode, a man who needs very little introduction. We're going to try and give him a decent one anyway, with over 10 years experience working as both a trackside and a simulator performance engineer for both Red Bull and Force India, who is now a brilliant content creator, has absolutely loved his stuff so far, focusing on mostly the data and analytical side of F1, something that I think is often has been lost for some time, but it's so great that we have that now to help us understand the sport that we know and love so much better. Without any further delay, it's Blake, otherwise known as Brrrake F1. Blake, first of all, thank you so much for coming on, and how are you doing this evening?
I am doing fantastic. It is not as hot as yesterday, so I've got the door shut. I don't have the aircon on. I'm living the dream, honestly.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you convinced me to do this tonight rather than yesterday, because I think if we got to that,
would have been miserable.
It literally, it would have had to have been an audio-only podcast, because I don't think we'd be able to wear too much attire, and I don't think our viewing audience would appreciate that too much. So I'm really glad that we're doing this the day.
You just fixate the stream, Adam.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just blurred from here down, or I'm just wearing a frozen towel. Just real quick, I need to go get another frozen towel real quick. Unbelievable.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
It'd have to have a mini fridge, yeah.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we got something lined up finally.
Yeah, we really, really appreciate you coming on the show. And it's really exciting as well. As I said, I've been following your content for a little while, and it's really fascinating to learn so much and understand F1 in a completely new light. Something that, you know, with this data analytical sort of drive that F1 has had in the last few years, it must be really fascinating for someone with your experience working in Formula One to now see fans actually getting a grip and understanding that there's so much more that goes into the sport that we know and love than just 20 guys driving around a circuit, and at the end, Lewis Hamilton often wins, but not so much at the moment.
Yeah. It's actually staggering how, like, on one hand, how much amazing insight even is you know, being outside the industry now, like how much access to information we have through various sources to make very, very well informed decisions. If you color that with a little bit of hindsight and experience and understanding of what's actually going on, looking at that and say, well, that looks like this, and being able to explain that without, you don't need to divulge intellectual property or anything. You can just say, here's how this kind of thing works. You don't say, this team I used to work for did this, but it says, this is probably what's happening. You can compare one team to another, and it's very, very rewarding. And when I left the industry, I wasn't really aware that I had access to this stuff. And then when I saw that it was available, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun, because nobody's doing this right now. And there's a lot of technical discussions that fans want to have. They just don't have a guide through the numbers. And there's plenty of access for anybody to literally pull up the same information I'm doing. But what I'm trying to do is explain it and make it interesting as well, because to the general public, a large part of them, numbers can be kind of boring, but if you can put it in a compelling and interesting light, there's some pretty exciting stories you can tell, and there's plenty of explanations as to why things are happening week in and week out, which people just say, oh, it's this or it's that. And it's like, well, it might be those things, or it could be this, and here's why.
Yeah, I think as an accountant by trade, I can very much agree that numbers are a great source of being able to tell a story as to how something has happened. And you can certainly relate to that with Formula One. So I think you and I might be cut from the same cloth. I'm trying to draw some similarities and common ground. And I think that's probably the only thing that I could probably gather that I can relate to in terms of what you do as well. So I'm going to take that for what it's worth, if
numbers.
That's all right with you.
It's numbers.
It's just numbers. That's all that matters. But
exactly.
Obviously, Blake, we're grateful that you've come onto the show. Really excited. Obviously, you've been enjoying your content for a while since you've started doing content on YouTube and Twitch. One question that we often ask on this show when we have a new guest, especially someone that's worked in Formula One before that might be able to give us a much more interesting answer, is pretty much an icebreaker question. And I'll throw it to you now and see what you come back with. If I was to give you any Formula One car from history and you could drive it for one day at any circuit in the world, and it doesn't matter which circuit, it can be an F1 circuit, it can be an Indy circuit, it could be around your local car park if you want to. What car would you drive and where would you drive it?
I think this is very it's not my favorite circuit because I've been to Barcelona very, very many times. But Max's first win in the Red Bull in 2016 at Barcelona, I would like to drive that car. It was not the fastest car on the day, but it did win the race. So that to me would be very, very cool. That was, for me, the first time as an engineer for a team that I had been a part of a win. So that was obviously super special to me. Max had just joined the team the week before that event, and that was pretty phenomenal. Getting to be a very close part of that experience. But if I could take another car, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in Spa this year, because that is a track and a half. That is a spectacular racing circuit, and if that disappears, I mean, circuits do tend to come and go over time, but I think that would be a huge loss to lose that one from the calendar.
Yeah, I agree with that one. It's a circuit that holds many great memories for me. It was the first circuit I ever went to watch a Grand Prix live back in 2001.
Spectacular.
Yeah, and made extra special by the fact that Michael Schumacher it was that won on my 10th birthday back then. And it couldn't have read it any better, to be honest, that particular day. Yeah, some of us still around. Some Schumi fans are still around, but Spa is shrouded in so much heritage of Formula One, and it is a shame that rumours are going around at the moment that its future on the F1 calendar is very much at risk. Our other DNF1 panel member who's not with us this evening, Courtney, did our very first TikTok. And guys, of course, I'm just going to quickly plug the TikTok, but obviously we're going to be doing a weekly short on there that Courtney's going to be doing. It's called Courtneys Corner, new segment there. You can check that out on our TikTok. And that will be on DNF1.official there. And of course, we'll leave the link in description for that one below if you're watching us on YouTube. So make sure to check that out. But Blake, love the decision, love the choice. Max Verstappen's Red Bull from the 2016 season at Barcelona. Really, really good choice. I like that. Obviously, you know, that holds fond memories for you and obviously with your career. One question I do want to ask you in that is, and it's I imagine a lot of people like yourself get asked this when you make content online, is how did you get into Formula One? Because there's no one route these days to get into Formula One. Some people say just go to university, do a degree and get a job in there. Some people have other stories. What was your story, if you could sort of summarize that for us, how you got into Formula One?
It was basically my roadmap is pretty direct. It was become very interested in motor racing, not at a young age. I think I was 18. A family friend said, here's our Spec MX-5 or Spec Miata. Do you want to go do some track days with it? So that led to some club racing, which I was very fortunate to, have access to that, because that stuff is not cheap. So club racing. And then I was like, well, I don't know what I want to do. Okay, I should be a mechanical engineer so I can learn how to do race car engineering and drive this Spec MX-5 faster. That led to Formula SAE, or Formula Student as it's called over here, which is a collegiate design series where you design, build, race Formula cars. And it was one of the best experiences and some of the fondest memories of my engineering career, including Formula One in that loop. So Formula SAE, Formula Student was spectacular. It gave me a lot of insight. And that, once I got involved in Formula Student, that really ignited the flame to say, right, I want to try to be a Formula One engineer. And so many people are like, there's very few Americans in Formula One anymore. So I was like, okay, well, what do I need to do? Ultimately, I went to the UK to do a degree at Oxford Brookes in motorsport master's degree, which gave me access to a visa to stay after I finished the course. It gave me time to focus on motorsport engineering at a higher level rather than general mechanical engineering as a bachelor's degree. And ultimately, I applied for a graduate position and got that job. And that opened the door. And then something like 8 months later, there was a vacancy and they needed a trackside performance engineer on Paul Ricard's car because somebody else had left the team on short notice. And I happened to be the least crap person at the time available for that somehow after only being in the industry for 8 months. I was like, okay. That was a brutal sink or swim experience, but very enjoyable one nonetheless. So I think that's kind of the path, and it's not atypical, but it's not particularly statistically common. But as far as that path, that's very common for a lot of the Americans that I know that have come into Formula One is more or less a very similar path to that. It's not the only one, but one of the biggest hurdles is access to a visa, which I think now there's a program again for a postgraduate work visa. So the eligibility to work in the country is one of the biggest things, which a master's degree will unlock for many people traveling from overseas to the UK.
So in a nutshell, guys, if you want to get in Formula One, stay in school. Basically, Blake's message on that one. That sounds like a good way to go. But I think it's quite fascinating because I think for a lot of people in the UK, especially for myself growing up, the dream ultimately is to be a driver. You know, you want to become the next Sir Lewis Hamilton. You want to be the next Max Verstappen, or absolutely. You know, to name a few. And avenues outside of that, they don't. I mean, they do now. They certainly present themselves now, and it's a lot more visible than I think that I remember when I was growing up. I think the idea is that if you wanted to work in Formula One and you couldn't be a driver for whatever reason, the idea is that you pick up a wrench, learn to be a mechanic, and then just find your way into that. But there didn't seem to be a direct avenue. So it's quite
there's no roadmap for that, is there?
No, there isn't at all. It just happens. You never really know where to apply. I mean, it's a lot more visible now on social media. You see the teams having their own apprenticeship schemes, and I look at some of that and think, wow, I wish that was available to me when I was 18. Maybe they were, and I just didn't see them. But
exactly. And I think they might have been to some extent, but now with internet, social media, and everything else, you have people advocating this stuff, advertising it online. You see teams posting job adverts on LinkedIn and Twitter, and that is awesome as the sport expands.
Yeah. And of course, I suppose yourself being an American, it must be quite heartwarming to see such a huge influx of interest from the States now in Formula One. And look, there's a myriad of reasons for it. I know a lot of people have cited Drive to Survive, but obviously we've had races at Texas, of course, your local circuit, if you like, and a lot of other places, a lot of reasons as well. But that must be pretty good now to see American fans taking a huge interest in the sport, and it's only going to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got 3 American events next year. Some people say it's too much, but the country is pretty vast. In all the races in Europe, for the most part, are closer than between Austin and Miami. I think that's pretty close to correct. It may not be completely correct if you include like Hungary, for example, but like most of the European races are super close to get to. If you're in the UK, it's like a short flight. Like, all right, Miami to Las Vegas, Miami to Dallas, or Austin, sorry. It's like, okay. But anyway, yeah, dude, it's very exciting to see that a lot of friends and family are like, hey, that's what Blake used to do. I'm like, yeah, why weren't you guys into it 10 years ago? But no, that's fine. And it's not for everybody, but it's cool that with the Drive to Survive and, the content creators like us, talking about the sport. I mean, how long you guys have been doing this? What, for 2 years?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like we are now a part of sharing this with the rest of the world. But it's also good to see a lot of people in North America becoming more interested and having more visibility of this.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken.
So let's hope it's for the worst. Or sorry, let's hope it's not for the worst in terms of dilution of the sport and everything else. But I think they're listening to what the fans want to see.
Absolutely. I mean, it's taken a few decades, but we've officially become the cool kids now. So I'm just going to roll with that, and we'll go with that. But obviously, one thing I did want to ask you before we get into the race preview, of course, because that's why we're here. I'm quite fascinated, obviously, by your career working with the likes of Red Bull and Force India. One question on this: did you have a favorite driver that you worked with? Because I imagine you worked with a pretty good list of drivers. The Red Bull alone must be pretty impressive.
Yeah. I don't think I have a favorite driver that I worked with because I really enjoyed working with all of them. So I worked with the Resta and Perez at Force India. And then I worked with Kvyat and Verstappen at Red Bull at the track. And then when I went back to the simulator, I worked with all of our test drivers, all the sim drivers, quite a few of the young drivers I got to know a little bit, and the Toro Rosso guys as well that would come through. So there's so many different characters, and there's no way to pick a favorite. And I can't say it out loud if I had one anyway. But like genuinely, I struggled to pick a favorite. Like I got to know quite a few of the guys very well, and enjoyed seeing the human side of the sport. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if any of them actually listen to this show, so I won't put you on the spot and ask who was the best on the sim. But that's absolutely fine. Lee, let's bring you into
Max
this.
was pretty quick on the sim.
Oh, well, I'm kind of expecting you to say Max because the guy was a massive gamer as well. And he's always doing iRacing and stuff like that all the time.
The dude eats, breathes, sleeps sim racing and real life racing, and it's not a surprise. It is his fuel, his passion, and it's cool to see the team with a competitive car. I am massively, however, disappointed not to see Mercedes in the mix because I feel like the end of last season, and it was unfortunate the way it ended, left a sour taste in so many fans' mouth. It's like we need something to heal the sport, like just to be like, look, it's fine because there's a lot of fans out there that are new to the sport and they don't get it and they've gone straight to the tribal mentality, and it's not nice to see. And it's like, come on, man, these are humans. These people are less mad about it than you are, and everybody agrees that it wasn't perfect the way the whole thing went from start to finish. So
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it kind of makes me glad that social media wasn't around when back in Adelaide 94 between Schumacher Hill. Because and literally it's hilarious. Like the amount of times I've spoken to some Damon Hill fans, and I always mean this in jest, being a Schumacher fan, but I always say, was that a racing incident? It's literally just trigger fuel. And it's the only time where I'll ever consider being a troll of any kind. And I'm not very proud of it, but there you go. But I totally understand.
Come on.
Yeah, you got some fun.
You got to take a joke every now and then. Come on, it's been a while since '94. Come on.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we're not going to be, well, how long for '94? That's like, 28 years? So I'm hoping that we're not going to be running around in 2050, if you like, on eggshells about Hamilton, Verstappen, Abu Dhabi, Michael Massey and all that. Maybe we will. I don't know.
Maybe we will.
Maybe we will.
Let's talk in 28 years, all right?
Yeah, I think we'll have to remember that one. That'll be something. That'll be impressive. If we're all doing what we're doing in 28 years. Remember we talked about this 28 years. Yeah, fun times. But Lee, let's bring you into this discussion as well, because of course we've got to talk about the French Grand Prix preview and the situation in the championship right now. We've got Max Verstappen leading Charles Leclerc by 38 points. The last couple of rounds, Charles Leclerc has started to slowly eke back into this championship race, albeit it's still a huge margin. But as we've seen from Max from Australia, that those margins can be eroded very quickly for different reasons. How are we feeling going into this Grand Prix, Lee? Is there enough evidence to suggest the momentum might be shifting a little bit back to Ferrari, or are we still in a position right now where we can say that the Ferrari is fast, Leclerc is fast, but we just don't know if it's going to win or retire right now?
I think you hit all the nails on the head there, to be honest, Adam. I would have said the momentum is shifting in Ferrari's direction, and Red Bull have a right to be concerned, but they're also reassured that they probably know the Ferrari may not finish, and if it does finish, it may not be both of them. Maybe one of them doesn't finish. So it's definitely gives Red Bull some more confidence that they know their car is a lot more reliable than it was earlier in the season when they had their own engine issues. But Ferrari obviously are aware that they've got a power unit issue, and they're just going full guns for it like Mercedes did at the end of last year, of like, we'll just take the penalty. Our engine's better. We'll just keep going.
Turn it up, run away.
Yeah. And as you can see with Lewis Hamilton last year, the Mercedes used it to great effect, especially in Brazil. And Ferrari can keep doing that. Once they take the big penalty from using the components, get the 5 grid slot. Okay, worst case, you finish. Worst case, obviously, you start at the back of the grid. But if Charles sticks it on pole, he starts 5th on a fresh engine. That still brings them back into the fight, and Red Bull know that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like from what I've seen so far from Ferrari this season in terms of this reliability issue, amongst all of the other reasons why they're not running away with either championship at the moment, as we kind of thought they would do after a few races, they've really taken a huge gamble on performance. They've prioritized performance since 2019 when they were sort of repairing after that technical directive came in, which obviously pegged them back. Whether we'll never know, I suppose, unless Ferrari admit themselves whether what they were doing was legal or not. We can only deduce based on what we know. But
we're still going to be talking about that in 28 years.
Oh, yeah. I'm literally bookmarking all of these topics now, Blake, so that we can discuss them bit by bit. They're already there, and I'm sure our followers will remind us of this if we are doing this. If you're still listening to this podcast in 28 years, then you're an OG. You're a hero, more than I could describe. But look, not getting sidetracked too much on this. Ferrari obviously took a big gamble on performance. It has paid off. I think a lot of us will agree that Ferrari, performance-wise, they've arguably got one of the best, if not the best power unit on the grid. The problem is that they've obviously had to sacrifice reliability, and it seems to me that they're relying at this point in time on the medium term that they can bring upgrades as long as they're permitted by the FIA under these new regulations. We should stress that, because I think that's lost on a lot of people. That reliability, they can improve it, but obviously requires written permission. And all the other manufacturers have done this as well. So we'll have to wait and see. But in terms of this championship right now, it does seem Ferrari has a package to win the championship, despite the deficits that they have at the moment. But reliability does seem to be a problem, not to mention the strategy issues as well. So coming into this weekend, and Blake, I want to throw this at you as well. How do you sort of see this going down this weekend? Where is this race going to be won and lost between Ferrari and Red Bull, and perhaps by extension by Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc? Is it going to be, can Ferrari be reliable enough to have the package to win? Will it be strategy, or will Red Bull sort of recover from their off couple of weeks?
My biggest takeaway coming off the back of Austria was Red Bull seemed to have arguably the second best chassis and engine so far this season. But for whatever reason, Ferrari hadn't accumulated points. One of their, and I think, not to no disrespect to Ferrari, but the two biggest things, you touched on the first one, was their power unit reliability, whereas Ferrari's power unit reliability seems to be the combustion engine power unit package, whereas Red Bull's issues early in the season appeared to be related to the ancillary components related to the power unit. So fuel system, I think, were the Red Bull's big issues. So it's not been as difficult for them because those components are actually on the chassis manufacturer side, the ancillaries for the most part. So they were able to get a hold of those. They weren't, massive reliability issues. The engine itself has been good. But Ferrari dropping the ball a lot, not some people in hindsight will say it's so obvious that they messed it up, but Ferrari dropping the ball strategically quite a few times. And the biggest thing I think will differentiate them will be, are the Ferrari and Red Bull guys fighting each other, or are they helping each other? Because we saw that in the sprint race in Austria, Charles and Carlos fighting each other. Actually, I think that lured Red Bull into a false sense of security with their pace. And I think they understood that the two Ferraris fighting each other meant that Max could manage the gap in the sprint. Then comes the race, struggling on the medium tire to the effect of half the performance life of the Ferraris. So I think this weekend we're looking at tires, strategy, and reliability are going to be, that's the whole race anyway. I think we know, for the most part, Leclerc fast, Max fast. Their teammates also fast, but, slightly less consistently so. Have we seen a Leclerc fumble in qualifying yet? I don't think we have.
Not really, no, we haven't. If anything, this is something that Charles Leclerc used to struggle with, putting it all together in Q3. Now, he's arguably one of the best, if not the most informed qualifier on the grid right now.
Absolutely. And so I think that is good, but considering the pace between the two cars and looking back at last year, the potential of the undercut, is it a one stop or two stop? I'm not really sure what we're going to see with these tires. I have not spent enough time looking at that this season to say what I think this event will be, but strategy, and I'm not sure pole position is that important. And we've seen that throughout the season that Leclerc has not delivered from pole in quite a few events for sometimes his own fault, once or twice, and then often strategically they just don't end up making the right call.
Yeah. And that's an important point. Pole position this season has proven not to be critical at all. I mean, you could only count on your hand how many times the drivers won from pole position. Not many.
Max has won more Charles pole positions than Charles has.
Yeah, and even when Max Verstappen was on pole in Austria in the main race, he didn't win that race, it's just crazy how that works. On this, obviously, you know, we can talk about tyres, and obviously I think that's been a big part for 2022 with the new regs as well, as to why we've had so much more overtaking and great racing. But looking at this weekend, and obviously reflecting back on Austria, because it was quite a surprise that we saw Saturday where the Ferraris were fighting amongst each other. Max Verstappen had that bit of a buffer to run away, and then he never looked like he was going to lose that lead. And then fast forward a day where the track conditions were cooler. The Ferraris obviously stayed away from each other and they ran their own races. And if it wasn't for reliability issues for Sainz, they probably would have finished 1-2 quite comfortably. And they had Red Bull covered on strategy on the tyres as well, which is something that we haven't really seen from Ferrari at all this season, other than the very early few weeks. So moving on into this weekend, and of course, Blake, you feel free to counter me if you don't feel that's a fair assessment. I mean, I looked at that and I was a bit surprised, but the data did seem to suggest that all the things went Ferrari's way in terms of conditions and tyres and everything for that to work. Moving on to this weekend, we're going to have a very hot weekend by comparison. We're looking at mid 30 degree temperatures in the air, so the track temperature is going to be high. This is a circuit, remembering last season's French Grand Prix, where Ferrari really struggled with the tyres. So much they looked the fastest outside the Red Bull and Mercedes last season, and then they both fell outside the top 10 in the main race. So this is a circuit that's really going to test them on their strategy. So looking at that, do you feel that we're going to get something similar to Austria, or do you feel that this is a circuit where Red Bull may be licking their lips and think, yes, we'll be able to recover this, we've got more options perhaps than Ferrari, assuming that their engines don't blow up halfway through the race anyway?
I have a funny feeling that whatever happened to Red Bull in Austria, they know what it is. Just from mumblings in the press, nothing too substantial. But looking at that, I think also Austria was the softest selection of tires available from Pirelli. We've shifted one step harder for France, but I think you will see. I think Ferrari is going to be on the top this weekend, and it will be their race to lose. I was surprised to see Max on pole in Austria, not by for him, but because the Ferraris, they've dropped a bit of drag off the rear wing, which was one of their biggest deficits to Red Bull. They dropped a bit of drag off their package without losing any performance, and their engine's a monster, and their high-speed performance is phenomenal. So I really just think that it's Ferrari's race to lose in France.
Was not expecting that. That's quite bold, to be honest. I was thinking the other way, but I mean, there you go. That's always full of surprises, I suppose, on this show. That's what we offer. But it's quite interesting. You would say that Ferrari, you feel that they have it to lose. In your words, I'm quite surprised, actually. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was expecting
okay.
I was expecting to say Red Bull, not for your allegiances to Red Bull, like formal working patterns. I was just expecting. I was looking at it thinking, surely Red Bull probably fancy this, considering all the issues Ferrari have had managing tyres this season, with the exception of Austria.
Yeah, I just think we saw in for example, on the longer stints on the harder compounds in Canada, which they seem to suffer on traction when following. And we saw that when they were racing each other, they did seem to struggle in the sprint race in Austria. But, we're using one step harder compound. Britain was the hardest. So Silverstone was the hardest selection of tires that we've run in the last 4 races. In France, one step softer than that. So the C2, C3, and C4. So I just my gut feeling, and I'm always just like anybody else, I'm so happy for my predictions to be wrong. But shooting from the hip and going with my gut, I still feel like Ferrari are absolutely on top in terms of outright performance, and they did make a genuine step, I believe, in Austria. And I think Red Bull took a step backwards, despite them qualifying so well. But it wasn't like it was a massive margin. We've seen, if you look at the qualifying gaps in Q3, it's either Ferrari and Red Bull are matched, and one of them gets a couple hundredths faster than the other, or the Ferrari puts in 0.3, 0.4% of lap time, maybe 0.2 or less, but they're putting a chunk into them. And some of that is, the Red Bull not having a perfect qualifying. Like we said, Leclerc looks bulletproof in qualifying. If anything, we're due for Leclerc to fluff a qualifying session. But he seems to have become very mentally strong and able to break down a qualifying session, improve, not make mistakes. And I think that's an asset.
And Lee, what are your thoughts going into this weekend with Red Bull and Ferrari? Of course, let's not forget Checo and Carlos Sainz obviously have their roles to play. Carlos Sainz, it does seem right now that despite his best efforts and the reliability issues that he's probably had more than Leclerc, but obviously Leclerc's has been more highlighted for his position in the championship. What roles do you feel that they have to play this weekend? And in addition to that, would you agree with Blake's predictions for this weekend?
On the prediction front, yeah, I would agree with that. It's not what you were thinking, but we know it's going to be a hot weekend. Obviously, Western Europe is going to be hot in general for the next few weeks. Right, maybe not as hot as it was here in the UK and temperature-wise, but it's still going to be hotter than the average. And for me, yeah, all right, all the teams are great and know what they're doing, but 2 weeks, they're enough time for Red Bull to identify the issue, but to bring a working solution to their tyre wear, the higher tyre wear we saw in Austria. It's obviously possible, but it could also be on the verge of unlikely. More Budapest give a bigger turnaround time, but that's just my gut feeling. Obviously, I've got no data to back that up, but I do think Ferrari are in a better position. Just tyre wear is going to be them. I think Red Bull's going to be more concerned about what Mercedes will be doing than Ferrari.
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, how important are tyres going to be this weekend? I mean, I'd imagine quite a lot because of the nature of the circuit. It can be quite abrasive. And obviously last season we saw that Mercedes and Red Bull were kind of, dwelling over a 1 or 2 stop strategy. And Red Bull made the call with Max. They put him on a 2-stopper. Mercedes didn't react to that in the way that they did in the Spanish Grand Prix the year before that, and or early in that season. And Red Bull ended up winning that Grand Prix and Perez ended up getting Bottas. And I remember Bottas on the radio complaining about Mercedes not reacting to the tyre issue. Could we see something similar to that this season at this weekend's Grand Prix with Red Bull and Ferrari? Because it does feel that we might be on the cusp of another race where we could be a 1 or a 2-stop strategy.
All right.
I think.
Go on, Brrrake.
No, I was going to say absolutely.
Yep, agreed.
Anyone want to elaborate on that one? Or...
After you. I've got a couple thoughts, but
go for it, Blake. Go for it.
I think it's exciting. Like the idea and I think this is one of the beautiful things about this sport, right? You look at people that are experts, in my past life and the people that I still know that work at the teams, and you think these guys and gals are very clever. They're very good, but there is so much chaos and uncertainty about what's going to happen. Tires are the dark art still to this day. Nobody's got them sorted out. And that's why we have such exciting Grand Prix. Is it a 1? Is it a 2? Bottas saying, I told you it was a 2-stop on the radio. Very flustered. I watched that. I just did the highlights reel. I was like, yeah, but it's the gut feel. It's like reacting to those things. And we've seen Ferrari quite stubborn this year, thinking, no, this is the strategy. Monaco was a great example of that. And that was a game of cards as well with the wet conditions into dry. But yeah, with engineers, the tires are not fully understood and you cannot predict everything. You have to be very reaction based. And I would love to see another, fringe 1 to 2 stop. Because that's where we see teams cracking. That's where we see drivers, engineers getting flustered, and that's where we see all the exciting decisions that make this championship worth watching.
That's where you see Carlos make the right call.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's the thing that's always worried me with Ferrari, and it's happened in the past with Vettel. He's made those calls in the past, and obviously didn't work out for him anyway. And Carlos has made them, and Leclerc has been rather hesitant to do that, or at least we don't see that from him or hear that he makes those calls. So maybe that's something to consider. I mean, the undercut could be quite a factor this weekend. I mean, we saw last season, we were talking about that. Max Verstappen was 3 seconds behind Hamilton when he pitted the lap before on the harder tyres, and despite Lewis's best efforts and hammer time and etc., Max got ahead of him. the undercut could prove to be quite powerful in this circuit this week, and I'm not sure if it will be as powerful with these tyres, but and the overcut as well has also been a factor this season. I think a lot of people have not really appreciated how hard it is to get these tyres warmed up to temperature. So the overcut could also prove to be vital this season. I mean, it's, yeah, loads of myriad reasons. But of course, guys, let us know on that one as we move on to the next discussion point. And that's the Flexi Floors. Everyone's new favourite topic. This is where everyone becomes an aerodynamicist or an expert engineer on Formula One overnight, and we all decide to convey this information to each other on social media through harmonical debate. If only that were true. Then, nevertheless, of course, this is something that we thought might come into effect from the French Grand Prix. It's been homologated back to the Belgian Grand Prix. Blake, I'm not going to ask you to sort of divulge how, if you think this is right or if you think that this is fair, but would you agree with the rationale the FIA are making? Because I'll openly admit, if they want to stop porpoising, that's fine. But I'm not really a big fan of them introducing new technical directives every time teams find loopholes in what they consider to be watertight rules, despite the fact that Ross Brawn said that they would do during the Bahrain test.
I think there's an interesting thing here, and I will put my hand up. I will say that I have not had my finger entirely on the pulse of this, and I've not been reading every single piece of information because there's a lot of bad information out there. And there's some stuff and, diagrams and stuff that don't make any sense when I'm watching them. And I'm like, that's not what's going on. So it sounds like I think the narrative works like this. FIA investigate porpoising. And one of the big issues with porpoising was not actually the fact that the cars are moving up and down rapidly. It's the fact that the cars are moving up and down rapidly and contacting the ground or internal suspension components, which are quite stiff and can cause high vertical accelerations and repeated, lots of cycles of that will cause discomfort to a very concerning degree. As FIA started looking into that, and they said, right, well, we've noticed that some of these teams, and I don't know who it is, like I don't know anything. They say, we've noticed that your floors are a little bit softer in this place. And historically, most of the Formula One cars run very much quite a bit of rake or nose down at the front. And the main part was the leading edge of the T-tray, which was touching the ground. And that's where they said, they're right, we'll specify this and this. Those can't move more than X when X load is applied. And then they said, and then the rest of the floor is just kind of a thing. So when investigating what's up with the porpoising, what's up with the grounding, these cars tend to want to run quite low to the ground, as low as possible. And the FIA found that some cars are softer than others. Was it deliberate or not? Or was it this teams are not even inspecting that? And I think teams are being deliberate about it and flexing and, pushing the boundaries inside of a loophole. But I don't feel like the Flexi Floor and porpoising, it's like we wanted to fix porpoising, but we found something else. And people keep talking about them in the same context, which makes sense because that's how they've been presented all this time. But one of the biggest issues is potentially the Flexi Floor. Gives you a cushion so that your plank or underbody, it's not particularly stiff. And if that hits the ground, that's fine. And if it's pulled away from your chassis and it's given you, 2-3 more mil rear ride height, that could be very sensitive for aerodynamic performance. And then if you do touch that plank T-tray, which is not quite touching the rigid chassis that your driver's sitting in, that gives you 2 or 3 more mil to play with in terms of, the car hitting the ground.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the whole thing, where it started, where it ended up, and what they need to do. I think that's one of those things that probably the FIA should clamp down on, because I don't think it's going to be a huge performance differentiator for the front running teams.
Yeah, I think the big question
that are sorry.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I think the big question is when this does come into effect from Belgium, and based on what we've heard, and again, this is all conjecture at the moment, we don't know for sure if it's these two teams, but it does seem to be targeted at Red Bull and Ferrari as the two leading protagonists of this that will be most effective. Will it peg them back to a point where perhaps Mercedes or maybe Alpine or some of the other midfield teams might get a lot closer or even compete with them, which I'm sure people would love to see? You're all in a competitive championship, but I do agree with you. The one point you did make that I'm really sticking to with my argument on this is that the FIA were looking at porpoising, and they've somehow come across this other thing, whether it was by their investigations or someone else pointed it out to them. Not going to name names or point fingers because I don't know. I'm not an expert. But for me, if the overall objective is to mitigate porpoising, and the teams that apparently have Flexi Floors are some of the better teams at handling porpoising, it makes no sense for me to get rid of that. That said, you know, from a logical perspective, I'm no expert, so there's obviously a lot more nuance to it than what I'm giving on it. But that's just, you know, my 2 cents on it. Lee, we've spoken about this just for the benefit of the audience that obviously aren't aware of your perspective on this. How do you see it? Do you feel that the FIA are right to clamp down on this? And if so, do you feel that this will help with porpoising, or is this more driven towards trying to close up the performance gap that has been established between Red Bull, Ferrari, and the competition?
Well, the way I'm looking at the whole Flexi Floor thing is very similar to what we've had in the last few years about the Flexi rear wings, the Flexi front wings. It's to balance out the competition and no unfair advantage through loopholes regarding performance. So, yes, I don't believe it is about cutting the porpoising. It is just solely about they don't like the fact that it flexes. Like they didn't like the fact that rear wings flexing. They didn't like the fact they didn't like the front wings flexing. And it's just so happens to come in, as Blake said, come in there upon their investigation about the porpoising. And they're like, bang on, you can't do that. It's come up at the same time. For me, it's nothing to do with the porpoising. It's just they just don't want that flexing. For me, it's just a very simple, logical of no, you can't do that. That's against the as Christian Horner puts it, the spirit of the rules. So it's the FIA clamping down on that, and that I have no problem with that.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Christian. I don't agree with a lot of things that Christian says sometimes, but I do agree with him and Adrian Newey in terms of how to interpret the rules, in that you can't base your judgment on the rules based on how they're meant to be interpreted or intended to be interpreted, or the spirit of the rules, if you like. It has to be based on what's written down. And I think that this is kind of my point when it comes to teams and being policed on new technical directives coming every 5 minutes every time a team finds a loophole. If you want to go down that route, you're just going to get to the point where you might as well say, let's forget it. Let's hire a company like Dallara, for example, make the chassis for everyone, we'll make it a spec series, and that's not what F1 is about. It was the same thing with DAS and a few other things. I mean, we could be all day naming all these innovations that have been outlawed just because a team has found something that's a game changer. And as you mentioned, Blake, this could only be worth perhaps a tenth at most, maybe not even that to some of these teams, or maybe the teams that are flexing their floors will find solutions that will literally cut off any time loss whatsoever.
Yeah, I just don't see that. I mean, because the numbers that are being thrown around in terms of how much they're moving, you know, these are numbers from team principals quoting things, but, you know, they're moving 3 or 5 more mil in tolerance. And 5 mil rear ride height can be a particularly sensitive figure. I'm not sure how sensitive it is on these cars, but in the past, like 5 mil front rear ride height was quite a bit. So teams will, if they are exploiting this, they will lose some performance. But in terms of the shuffle of the grid and the gap, realistically, Mercedes is no better in terms of single lap pace than 0.5% off the front, which is a huge gap. 0.5% of lap time is a big gap. So I think Mercedes were one of the teams that struggled the most with porpoising from a performance point of view. And yes, this directive does not any longer appear to be targeted at porpoising. It's some other loophole that teams have found. I think it might bring them a little bit closer, but I don't think they're there yet. No. And if it did bring them closer, I wouldn't be disappointed that it happened.
No, of course not. No, I think we should stress that if there was a magic switch where we could literally make everybody competitive together, I mean, what a race that would be. I mean, obviously, we don't want random results every single week. We want to see a story of a championship being established. Yep. But it would be nice to see. Obviously, I know the FIA and F1, they're not going to be happy about the fact that they brought these new rules. It was going to be a big reset. I know the budget cap is intended to work over a more longer term period than the short term, but I don't think they'd have been happy about the fact that we ended up with 2 teams dominating the championship, and then obviously the hope of a Mercedes coming back to the front. Whilst that seems to be growing, seems to be the one thing they're counting on, and maybe this as well to try and plug that gap in the short term. But as I said, I'm no expert in this. I'm not really a fan of what's been going on, but you know, if it creates better racing and everyone's happy with it afterwards, then yeah, no, fair enough. But anyway, look, we'll move on. Guys, of course, get your opinions in this. Of course, you know, whether you agree with us or not, or agree with me or not, it's okay. Your opinion.
If you disagree with me, I don't want to talk to you. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, you can tell that to Blake on his channel, which I'll let him plug a little bit later on. And Blake's an expert, mind you, on what he does. So, you know, be warned, he may come back at you with facts. I know people don't like that sometimes, but I digress. Let's talk about Mercedes. And Mercedes, of course, they have made steady progress. I know people have been getting excited, understandably, about the progress that they've made, especially, how well George has been driving this season. And Sir Lewis Hamilton, he is starting to find his A game again. And, after a less than exciting start by his high standards, of course, I'm sure he would admit. How do we think they will fare this weekend? Lee, I'm going to come to you because this is a circuit historically where Mercedes have been strong at. And given the nature of the circuit, a combination of high and mid-speed corners, they may feel they might get a little bit closer to the front, if not, clearly ahead of the rest of the pack.
Yeah. Well, the smooth nature of the circuit is obviously going to play to their current car's advantage. Based on what we see about Mercedes tyre wear, they don't have their tyre wear isn't bad. They actually, on the other side, that it takes too long to warm up, which may, I don't know if that's going to be an issue on a really hot track, to be honest. So as Blake said, it's an unknown art, but I think the Mercedes are probably going into this weekend rubbing their hands. This is another opportunity like Silverstone, where they were fighting for the win. Yes, it didn't work out, but they had a shot of winning at Silverstone. They surprised themselves with their speed in Austria, and I think they're coming here going, we can get in this fight. They probably won't be on. I don't expect a Mercedes pole position. I don't expect a Mercedes front row, but their race pace, I think they'll bring themselves right into the fight. That they'll be annoying Ferraris and Red Bull strategy. That where you talked about the 1-stop, 2-stop. Mercedes are a safe third fastest team. They can use a oddball wildcard strategy, and all of a sudden you've got Lewis or George has just popped up, especially if there's been a safety car. And hey, where these Mercedes come from? Because they're not in the championship fight. They can take risks. Alpine or McLaren aren't going to close that gap up to them in the constructors, so they can fight freely to usurp or not, upset the order.
Yeah, I must say I'm very impressed with Mercedes this season. With the fact that they've had the ability to maximise practically every opportunity that they've been given. It almost seems crazy to think that this is a team that, in theory, shouldn't have the package or the pace compared to Red Bull and Ferrari to be on the podium every single race, and yet for some reason they're always there. Even if they seem nowhere in the race or having a race amongst themselves, they're always there to pick up the pieces. And the reliability of their power unit, that's something that they focused a lot on in the winter break because it was something that held them back last season. It must be commended for how well they've been doing. Blake, what are your thoughts for Mercedes this weekend? And I suppose to add something extra to the mix as well, could this be a weekend where we might finally see a George Russell, Sir Lewis Hamilton battle at Mercedes? Because it's something that has been brewing for a while, even though it's all friendly and respectful so far. But sooner rather than later, when these two have a good race with no intrusions and no issues in the midfield, that they've got themselves to fight against, and something that I feel that's going to come sooner rather than later.
Honestly, I would love to see it because I think they're both exceptional talents, and the fact that for whatever reason they don't, looking back at the last handful of races, they don't tend to be too close to each other. Yeah, like they do finish, next to each other, but they haven't got their elbows out next to each other for whatever reason. And on one hand, I'm not sure how Mercedes is going to handle that internally. How are they going to deal with, team orders? Because like we've seen Ferrari literally throwing points away due to not, from my opinion, not implementing team orders. It's like, right, you're much faster. Get out of the way. Let's give them the priority. We see McLaren squabbling over this. Oh, I think I'm faster than the teammate boxes, and nothing happens. It's like, okay, come on. But I think Mercedes know what they're doing in that regard. Mercedes, as Lee said, they're kind of in no man's land. It gives them flexibility. We saw them in Britain and Canada in the mix on merit, on pace in the race. So comes, Saturday, they weren't going to be front row. That's fine. They don't need to be. Ferrari clearly having issues. The Red Bulls also having issues, be it damage, collisions, whatever else, giving away points there. But the Mercedes, until Austria, those two events, they were well and truly in the mix on pace. They were fighting for podium spots. But what happened in Austria, people like from we talked about this before the call, but people talk about the numbers, and it's like, yes, Hamilton did finish third in Austria, and it was a good race for him. He was in no man's land, but he had absolutely no answer for the front runners. Whereas in Austria whereas in Silverstone in Canada, those guys were on fire. That car was a different machine than we had seen all season. So I'm actually not sure where to put my my mark on those guys for this weekend coming up. I think we might see hopefully closer to a Silverstone-esque performance from them. But something happened last week as well. It wasn't their stint length, because they were able to do the stints. They were just not quick at all. We saw them in qualifying struggling, both of them binning the car, which is very atypical for George or Lewis. Those guys are good at qualifying. They do not mess up like that. So that was weird. That was very weird for me to see. So were they getting spooked about some new regulations, trying new things with the car to make sure they're in the best place to be ahead on these changes that they need to make? And did they take a hit in a performance last weekend?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people were sort of citing that there was a bit of an imbalance at the rear of their setup, which obviously was subject to some crosswinds, which obviously affected it. I mean, there were similar incidents, so it's certainly plausible. Something that they obviously corrected in the sprint race, where there was completely nowhere compared to the lead guys. And then obviously in the race, yes, it was still in no man's land, but their pace was still relatively good. But obviously we don't want to get too excited and say, oh, they're going to be right there. But, track specific, the conditions work. They're there to pick up the pieces, and that's what they've been doing this season. And I think at some point it's going to come together for them, but I don't know where that's going to be, when that's going to be, and in what way. But hey, it's good to see that they're there. It's something for the league guys to think about.
Absolutely.
But a team like Mercedes, they'll get it. They'll sort it out eventually. It's just a case of when. Summarising through the midfield now, of course, there's a lot of stories to go through each and every week with the midfield. But what we tend to do on this show, Blake, as we already talked about before we went on air, was we like to pick out two drivers in particular in the midfield that we think are going to have an interesting race. Doesn't necessarily have to be a good one. It can be a bad one as well. And then we ask, obviously, reasons why they're ones to watch out for this weekend. So I'm going to put that to you first. If you can give me two drivers from this midfield, obviously the likes of Alpine, McLaren, Aston Martin, I should say, Alfa Romeo, Alfa Tauri, Williams, and Haas. Which two drivers do you think that are worth looking out for this weekend?
It's very noteworthy right now, and it's been discussed a lot. Mick Schumacher. I want to see if he's actually, after Silverstone, people are like, what's this new guy? He's acting differently. He's driving very well. The Haas also very well put together in the midfield in Austria. I think that's going to be a very interesting one. And then seeing both him and his teammate, they were very close to each other a lot through the race. So I think that's going to be exciting. And the other one, so that's my first pick is Mick in the Haas. I think Haas are wildly variable in terms of performance, and a lot of that might be down to track-specific nature of their car, and it works in some places and not others, or just the inability to get the tires working in some of these other circuits. Whereas at these more classic traditional circuits where you can put quite a bit of load through the tires, are they, back to where they should be? So, fifth, sixth fastest team, whatever. Currently seventh in the points. So that's my first pick. And then Lando, I feel like if McLaren can do something good, I think we will start to see some interesting stuff from Lando. But I'm mostly, honestly, and as we talked about before the call, just disappointed to see how much McLaren are struggling. And to the same tune, Aston, I said you said 2, but 3. Aston having had so much more money injected into the team and a new set of regulations, and they're way, way back there. I didn't expect to see that. Force India, Racing Point, Aston Martin used to be one of the best bang for your buck teams. So, but in terms of drivers, I think I've particularly personally have an eye out for Mick this weekend to see how he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point on Aston Martin. I think we talked about as you mentioned, some of the team names you've mentioned, how they've always developed a reputation for being one of the best, if not the best team at getting the best bang for their buck. At getting the most out of what they have available resource wise. And often people say, if you like the Moneyball blueprint in this case, the worst thing you can do to a team like that is throw money at it and expect it to become a world beater. It just doesn't work that way. Maybe that's something that's Aston Martin are struggling with, and we're seeing it in Vettel's body language that people are questioning now, are we seeing the final chapters of Seb's career, something that we don't want to see, but right now,
No.
you almost feel like just to ease the pain, it's not going to get any better for him.
No. Yeah, that's a very uncomfortable story because it's like a book that's not finished, you know?
Yeah, very much so. And but as part of me almost feels like, you know, maybe he'd be happier elsewhere. It's one of those things you have to kind of have to deal with, I suppose. But on the subject of Haas quickly, if we can, because obviously we talked about McLaren. Obviously they've been struggling, and it's completely flabbergasted me as to how they seem to be up at one week and down the next. They just don't seem to find a rhythm for whatever reason. Haas are a very streaky team as well for the opposite reason, and a lot of people have been saying, obviously, this is a team that hasn't really upgraded their car at all, other than one or two minor things, but nowhere near as much as anyone else. And there was a fear that they may fall back. But the last few races, they've been there or thereabouts, whether it be in qualifying or they've been good in the race. Austria, they had a brilliant weekend for the sprint weekend, especially Mick Schumacher as well. Do you think, Blake, that that's down to the fact that it's track specific, or they've understood their car, they've fine-tuned it to a point where they're really on top of it compared to other teams who are just bringing new parts all the time and have to relearn their car and how they adapt? Or do you just think that it's just down to the inherent nature of what makes that car good at certain circuits?
I think, honestly, I could come up with a narrative for any one of those things, but my gut feeling is if they've not been changing the car much philosophically, they're just understanding it better. You know, they don't have the cash to throw at it right now. And they're literally, I think one of their probably biggest things is they've understood their car aerodynamically. They know how to put it in the window. And then over the last couple of events, they've been very good at getting the tires to work for them, which is, you know, when you see teams all over the place, it's one of two things. It's like you're not changing your chassis that much itself. You're changing aerodynamics, and often aerodynamics is very well linked to tire performance, being able to put the energy in the tires to switch them on or not. So by virtue of not having too much new stuff at the track, they're able to lock it in. And it's an interesting narrative. And, you know, I was looking at France last year. They were off the back, weren't they? They were literally dead last in France last year. So they've clearly turned something around this year, I think. Mick is doing reasonable. Kevin also is doing, you know, people aren't talking about him too much, but he's doing a pretty kick-ass job, which is hats off to him. But I think it's a little bit of everything that you touched on, honestly, Adam.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's right to point out Kevin Magnussen's input as well. I think he's done a great job so far, and it's very easy to not notice that when Mick has started to produce the performances that we'd expect of him. Hopefully that will continue, and Haas can continue to grow. It's a good lineup. Hopefully that continues. Lee,
yeah, absolutely.
Who's your picks for the drivers to watch out for this weekend in the midfield?
For me, two come to mind, which is one is Fernando Alonso. Being the Alpine has shown some good speed at more the classic type of circuit race, but also Fernando's shown he's had some good speed and he's just not had the luck. So I think Alpine as a team is one to watch, including Ocon on that. But I think Fernando's going to do one of his performances this weekend. And it's just he's just building up to, you know, he's just had some bad luck, and one weekend's just going to work for him. And I've just got a feeling. It's just a gut feeling, got no basis or facts to back this up. Fernando's just something's going to work for him this weekend.
Yeah, for those of you
Twitter,
listening,
get the pitchforks out.
For those listening,
come for Lee.
For those listening on the audio platform, Blake is absolutely loving that, sort of rubbing his hands together as Lee was sort of wiring up that prediction. But on the subject of Alonso, Lee, obviously we talked about him in a bit of depth with Alpine. Obviously his misfortunes this season, that, you know, and obviously what we saw in Austria where he had to start the back of the grid at the sprint and obviously start from the pits and everything else. It just ruins your weekend, and obviously you had to put a performance together to get in the points in Austria. Overall, you know, I think a lot of people cited him as driver of the day, and it completely went unnoticed. But you know, there you go. But one thing I do want to ask, Alonso is a guy that we know is prone to exaggeration in some of his comments. You know, the guy's very box office in his interviews, perhaps less so than we remember when he's not battling at the front, as we often want to see. But he did make some interesting comments, feeling like the team have cost him some points. Not saying it in as many words or quoting him or anything like that, but he has alluded to the fact that he's lost a lot of points this season owing to issues out of his control. So I suppose the question to ask is, are Alpine wasting Fernando Alonso right now? And we're talking about a guy in his 40s now who looks like he might be signing another medium-term deal with the team. Are they wasting their best asset?
Well, my short answer is yes, because if Fernando's not fighting at the front, you're wasting Fernando's talent.
What about you, Blake?
It really sucks seeing Fernando not able to compete, because he is probably one of the most ferocious competitors on the grid. As his personality, his driving style, his ability, it's frustrating to see that, because he is a monumental talent, and having reliability issues costing him the ability to score good points, and also having a car that's not quite up to the pace, that doesn't allow him to compete with the some of the new generation. That's just a story we want to see, isn't it? So that's my feeling on it. I think I have a lot of time for Alonso. Yeah. Absolutely.
No, absolutely right. I love the thought. I love the concept of Fernando fighting against his young guns. It just doesn't look out of place. His pace is phenomenal for a guy his age, and it doesn't look like he's slowing down anytime soon. I mean, Alpine, it's quite interesting because reliability-wise, they're, on the surface, they might not seem like they're very good, but it's only McLaren, Aston Martin, and Mercedes that have run more mileage this season than Alpine. So the car is fairly good, but it seems that it's all the bad luck is happening in Alonso's side of the garage. Ocon just seems to have not only a bulletproof car, but he's driving pretty well himself. He's picking up the points for them. So for Fernando, it's Alpine have got to find a way to get that luck to come across to the other side of the garage. So to get the benefit of both their guys. Because right now, the fact that they're level on points for fourth in McLaren in the Constructors' Championship is one of the most surprising things that I've seen this season. And I think we can all agree we've seen a lot so far. It is amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. McLaren are having a very difficult time, and looking at the retirements, it's all Alonso. Like Ocon's chugging in through the points. We've had 3 DNFs from Alonso.
I think Silverstone is probably the only one I can think of where Ocon had some trouble. And that's it. Unless anyone else knows of any, or on Blake, unless you're checking them now and you can let me know later on, then by all means go for it. But it really does. Alonso does need that luck. Lee, who's your second driver before I forget to watch out for?
My second driver is the performance may not come, but it's more for me is Alex Albon. Obviously, Williams had their big upgrade package at Silverstone, and it was on Alex's car, and Alex got like 20 meters, maybe a bit further. I didn't actually measure how far he got before he got punted into the wall, but they didn't get to actually see that in action over a full race distance or full race weekend. Obviously, Austria is a unique type of circuit, high altitude, especially obviously that affects the aeroloads and things in itself. So going back to the normal circuit, seeing what Alex can do with that upgraded Williams, and see if it's any good as Williams hope it is. So I'll be really watching Alex's performance this weekend.
Yeah, I think Latifi is also getting the upgrades this weekend as well.
Yeah.
So as I said, hopefully for their sake that they will prove the trick, because it does look like a decent car in Alex Albon's hands, and we'll see what Latifi can do with it going into this weekend when he has the full package as well. So, hopefully Williams will have a good weekend. It's certainly been a decent car and they've been closer, even though a lot of people still feel that it's the slowest package on the grid so far. But, they're trying. That's all we can say about Williams. They are trying. Let's move on to the final part, because I'm being mindful for time. This part of the episode, guys, for those of you that aren't familiar, we do our top 3 predictions, and we also offer a bold prediction as well. And Blake, seeing as you're our guest on this episode, I'm going to hand the floor to you first. So if you could give us your top 3 for this weekend and also a bold prediction as well.
I think this weekend top 3 will be Leclerc, Verstappen, Perez. Bold prediction would be that we will see Mercedes not third fastest team this weekend in the race.
Ooh. Dare I ask who that's going to be?
No, I don't think I can say who it might be, because in my opinion, the midfield is wildly variable. I could be completely wrong on that. I'm just saying it just to say something divisive. But, off the back of Austria, genuinely, it does look like they had a struggle. Will they resolve it? I don't know. Red Bull also struggled in Austria. Will they be able to lock it in P2? I think so, because even with the tire performance life issues they had, it was an easy P2 with a reasonable gap to the Mercedes. But I think the Mercedes took a hit last week, and I'm not sure if they've got it sorted. The Red Bull took a hit, but it wasn't a very big hit. So that was the furthest off we've seen Mercedes in a while, and it's curious. So it would not be terribly surprising to see if they don't get that solved, that one of those very variable, wildly unpredictable midfield teams snatches them up in the race.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We talked about this before already, but it's just so hard to judge where Mercedes really are or how far away they are. It almost depends on which race you go to or who you ask. It's so hard to sort of get measure any sort of tangible progress compared to the top two. But, we'll have to wait and see. It certainly is quite interesting. Lee, let's go to you. What are your top three for this weekend? And give us a bold prediction as well. Maybe one more bold than Blake's, perhaps. Might be hard.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very good one. Blake. Very, very interesting. I'm very curious to see what potential midfield team could take it to Mercedes. But I'm going to start with my bold prediction and go with that. After Charles has now proven he can overtake Max on the circuit multiple times, that Max may decide to be a bit more elbows out in overtaking, be it him overtaking Charles or Charles overtaking Max. So my bold prediction is we're going to see some form of contact between Max and Charles. Doesn't have to be race ending, but I reckon there will be some contact between them this weekend, which then leads into the top three that I think will be Carlos, Lewis, and Sergio.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite an interesting one. Obviously, he's got the taste for winning, Carlos, so why not go again? But Blake, obviously, you've worked with Max, so you understand Max the man and Max the driver a lot better than most of us mere mortals that watch Formula One. And of course, you've probably looked on social media and heard a lot of opinions from pundits and fans alike, and obviously they're going to give different accounts on how they see Max Verstappen in terms of his driving conduct, especially from last season and obviously compared to this season. I guess my question to this is, how do you see this season compared to last season? Is this more, are you expecting Max to be not necessarily feisty, but obviously what we saw in Austria, Max didn't really fight Charles much. He obviously gave up the ghost thinking that, Charles had the better package on the day. There's no point fighting him at the time. Are we expecting Max and Charles to get a bit more feisty amongst each other with respect, of course? I'm not expecting anything compared to what we saw with Lewis and Max last season. But how do you assess it at the moment?
Well, I think taking a step even further back than that quickly is Max came in quite young, and he came in very aggressive because he knew he was fast. And he made a lot of mistakes early on, lots of collisions that often ended his own race more than anyone else's. And he's refined that. Last year was, no holding back at all. It got pretty bad, and I feel like it always takes two to tango. So, but yeah, there were instances where one or the other fine, but this year we haven't seen that, and I don't feel like they've ever been particularly close enough to be there. It's like either he's running off with it 1-2, or the other guys are way ahead. So we haven't seen too many laps where they have a whole lot of opportunity to get their elbows out. In Austria, the Ferrari was so damn fast. Like, what's the point? Max was, he was half a stint out. So when they're coming up on him, he's at the end of a stint and he's already struggling to manage them. So he's maybe in the past he might have fought that more, but he is much more clever and has a lot more experience under his belt now. He knows what he's doing in that regard. So I think, and even after last year, he's probably learned a lot from last year, as have a lot of other drivers after seeing that.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think I'm kind of expecting more along the lines of what we saw in Bahrain and Jeddah between Max and Charles. I think that was kind of the fun tactical. It was really fun, especially in Jeddah when they were sort of swapping positions at the DRS line because they didn't obviously want to be caught first over it by the time you go to turn one.
Yeah.
But that's fun. That's what you want to see. And I agree. I think there's a lot of lessons that have been learned. This World Championship, regardless of how people feel that he won it, that's neither here or there. We're not really worried about that right now. The history books will tell us Max won it, and that's all that matters. But and that's not me offering my opinion on it. Like, we've been there and done that. But I do feel that he has learned a lot from the experience and from last season, and I think we're seeing that this year. And I don't think. Look, if Lewis ends up in a race-winning, championship-winning Mercedes again in this short term, and they do come together again, I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as feisty or as aggressive as what we saw in 2021. I think both of them have learned something from that experience. But no, I'd agree with that. I think that's a fair assessment, because it's really hard to get a fair opinion on this, and someone that actually knows what it's like to work with someone like Max. And luckily, we have someone with us right now that can tell us. So there you go, the inside track right there. My predictions: I'm going to go with Max to win. I think this is going to be a good weekend for Red Bull. Contrary to all the expert advice that you've given and Lee has given as well, I'm going to go with Red Bull because that's going with my gut. And I think I'm going to go with Leclerc P2, and I'm going to go with Alonso P3. That's my bold prediction. I think there's going to be chaos.
That's your top three and your bold prediction all in one.
Yeah, we like to sometimes get them in together. So I'm going with Alonso P3. God. Come on, Fernando. You got.
I'd love to see it.
It's got to be fun.
We got a couple Alonso lovers in here. I knew I liked you guys already.
I'm looking forward for that happening, so that we see the really 3D video come out with Magic Alonso and try and see how he's going to get Alonso on the podium to Alonso P1, as he often does. For those of you familiar with the content, I'm sure loads of F1 fans have seen his content right now. If you haven't, you should definitely recommend it. Really funny stuff. But look, guys, I think that's all we got time for this episode. Blake, before we do sign off, here's your opportunity now for those of you that haven't heard of you yet, and if you haven't, where have you been, to plug your content and let our lovely followers know where they can check you out for more great content on your channels.
I appreciate that, Adam. So I post content on a lot of platforms. My main platform is YouTube, Brrrake F1 for Formula One content. So it's Brrrake F1 on YouTube, Brrrake F1 on TikTok, and then on Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram, it's just Brrrake. So those are kind of where I use everything. So YouTube and TikTok is Brrrake F1. Everything else is just Brrrake. And if you search for any of that, you will find me. My Twitch is a bit of gaming, a bit of Formula One gaming, a bit of F1 watch along analysis, whatever else, and then most of that content you will see on my F1 YouTube. So I am that is what I'm doing now. I'm spending all my life scheduling reels and videos and everything else.
It's fun, isn't it?
It's so much fun.
It's one of those strange things where it sounds exciting, and then you get into it, and then as soon as you get some success, you're like, I'm committed to this now. I can't stop doing it. Otherwise,
I love it though. It's fun. It's so much fun.
Well, it's some great stuff. I can certainly vouch for that, guys. So definitely check
out
Blake. Really, really good content. Guys, of course, if you are new to the channel and you have enjoyed what you've seen from this episode, make sure to like the video and consider subscribing to the channel. We're chasing 1,000 subscribers. We're not too far away from that, but we could do with your help to get us over the line. That'd be really, really great stuff. And of course, we've got the qualifying watch along for the French Grand Prix this weekend, 3 p.m. UK time on the DNF1 YouTube channel. Make sure to check that one out with myself, and perhaps we'll have a guest for that one as well. We'll wait and see. But of course, if you're following us on your favorite podcasting platform and you want to give us a 5-star review, you can do. But of course, remember, if you are not listening to us on Apple iTunes and you can't give us a written review, make sure to leave us a 5-star review if you think we're worthy, of course. Why wouldn't you? And screenshot that and send it to us on our socials. They'll be plugged out there, but DNF1_official on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter as well. And of course, we've got our TikTok page as well. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Please stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Thanks for watching. Take care.